Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer. Today on The Detail, stalking has been a crime in the US and parts of Australia since the early 1990s. In the last decade, England, Wales and the European Union have all made it illegal as well. But in New Zealand, while some stalking behaviours are illegal, stalking itself is not a crime.
Police have charged a 30-year-old man with murder following the death of a woman in the Auckland suburb of Massey. Last night's incident has shocked members of the community after many heard screams and were warned by police to lock their doors.
2 years ago, Fazana Yakubi was fatally stabbed by her stalker, who she'd already complained to police about several times.
They didn't just have one complaint or one thread of evidence. This poor lady kept reporting, showing all of these risky behaviours, and they literally did nothing.
New Zealanders are fed up and are calling for a change to the laws.
Pressure is mounting on the government to make stalking a criminal offence, with some of New Zealand's most powerful lobby groups signing an 8,000-strong petition.
That call came in June, and Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith responded by promising things would change.
We do need to change the legislation. We agree with that. We want to do it, and it's my commitment that we will get a bill into the House before the end of the year.
But will a specific law really make a difference? Will it stop the harassing of teenage girls on Instagram? Will it stop men lurking outside a woman's house? Would it have saved Fazana? I spoke with criminal defence barrister Iswari Jayanandan to understand what laws already exist to protect people against stalkers and what a legislation change might look like. First, though, why don't we have one yet?
I would imagine why we don't have it is we don't have a whole lot of cases that are prosecuted which touches on behaviour that is akin to stalking. I suppose if we had a floodgate of harassment type prosecutions, which the police have the powers to do, that would have probably focused more people and other stakeholders on whether there is a dire need for a separate stalking type legislation.
But just because there aren't a lot of cases doesn't mean it's not happening. Because stalking isn't considered an offence, there are no official figures to tell us how bad things truly are. But an Amnesty International survey reported about 1 in 3 Kiwi women have been stalked online.
Thousands of people right now are living in fear because of their stalker.
When stalking behaviours are reported to police, they're recorded as anything from suspicious behaviour to trespassing, burglary or assault. And those same categories could also be used to record non-stalking incidents. Stalking ranges from standing outside someone's house to spamming them with messages on social media. But a lot of people don't actually know what qualifies as stalking or that it is so prevalent. Iswari says that's part of the problem.
Just like cyberbullying required a lot of investment in public education to teach schools and parents and the public about cyberbullying, we have not had any such focus on stalking, and there's not been a dialogue among interested parties about this issue up until, I think, to be frank, until about June this year when there was an open call for it. So I don't think we've become conditioned to accepting what stalking is. I think it's probably more to do with our knowledge of what constitutes stalking. Because if you look at the Harassment Act has a whole number of behavioral patterns that would suggest it's harassment. But I don't think the vast majority of the public are even aware that some of these can amount to harassment. There's no awareness around it. So if you don't have awareness around it, that might be why the public doesn't know what the options are.
Well, let's do that then. Let's make listeners aware and go through what is currently in Aotearoa's legislation that covers stalking behaviours. So you mentioned the Harassment Act 1997. Tell me a bit more about that.
The Harassment Act provides for a criminal defense. So the vast majority of public opinion about the Harassment Act is that it's a civil remedy. It doesn't really occur to them that this is something where the police can have an active interest in. But there is a specific provision under Section 8 of the Harassment Act, which allows for criminal harassment. And the criminal harassment maximum penalty available is a term of imprisonment of 2 years. The range of behavior that falls into it is actually defined in Section 4, and it goes beyond the basic traditional watching, loitering, preventing, hindering, following, stopping. It also allows, if you enter someone's property, if you take their possessions, if you make contact with person B, expecting it to get to person A, electronic communication, telephones, offering material or leaving it in that person's house. So it is reasonably wide, but it's just not being used.
So let's say a person notices someone following them home one day and it makes them feel unsafe. They can report the incident to the police, and if the police consider it serious enough, they can lay charges immediately. But if they consider it to be a minor incident, they might wait to see if it happens again. If it does, they can lay charges the second time. But Fazana Yakubi had reported that she was being threatened and stalked almost 8 weeks before she was murdered. And these laws weren't enough to protect her.
21-year-old Fazana Yakubi was threatened, stalked and then fatally stabbed in West Auckland in December 2022. She'd complained to the police via the 10-5 online reporting system 2 months earlier and provided messages the man was sending her, including one where he threatened to throw acid on her face.
Police do accept that we let Fazana and her family down when we missed opportunities to properly assess and investigate her concerns. We accept she came to us for help and we did not provide her the service that she and in fact all other New Zealanders deserve.
Officers also failed to link her file with the reports of a young girl who was being threatened by the same man, missing an opportunity to gain a fuller picture of his actions.
I would imagine that case created a huge amount of public interest and media interest in the issue of stalking. And prior to that, I would imagine there was no hue and cry. I'm not belittling it, but effectively the way legislation seems to happen is somebody somewhere raises it as a significant public issue, and then the successive governments or current governments take interest in it. And I would imagine until the Yakubi case came along, there was no real publicity surrounding the issue of stalking.
The police said to me that because there was no real proof, that there was no real legal help that they could give me. All of a sudden, someone flies through the front door. I remember thinking, he's here, John's inside. My first thought was he's going to kill me. I spoke to the police. They said, well, if we can get someone to you, we'll send them, but there's not a lot we can do. It's now 3 years down the line and he is still stalking me remotely.
Those clips are from a new documentary about a Kiwi woman's experience of being stalked by her ex for several years. Fazana's murder also prompted many others to open up about their experience of being stalked and how the law failed to protect them. Mental health advocate Jazz Thornton is one of those people.
A couple of weeks ago, there was a man from literally the other side of the world that was messaging me about his obsessions with me, sending some very scary messages, and he then flew all the way to New Zealand to physically find me, and he located me within 2 days. It was terrifying, and the reason that I'm posting this is that there was a open letter that was released yesterday that is around the fact that here in New Zealand, stalking is not illegal.
The police told Jazz all they could do was send him a warning letter and question him at the border if he tries to come back to New Zealand again. Another woman who spoke anonymously to News Hub spent a decade being taunted by a violent ex-partner.
It was exhausting and frightening, and for a while there I thought I was going to die. The setting fire to my house, the turning up to my house with a weapon, hacking my emails.
Even after trying to burn her house down, police could only charge him with willful damage and breaching a protection order. He was convicted and has since moved to Australia.
In May, Labour MP Ginny Anderson also submitted a bill to Parliament to make stalking a crime.
There are multiple cases in New Zealand on a daily basis where women are in danger and there is not enough action being taken to prevent instances that have happened.
And Aswari sees it in her work too.
It's not unusual, put it this way, for me to hear complain and say, well, I told the police so many times, they did nothing about it. I told him that he's calling me all the time and he's following me in his car, and the police did nothing about it. And we sometimes get that type of information in the course of another hearing when the person has been charged with some family violent offending. There's a database that the police have where they do log in family violence incidents. And I think we're getting a lot of that information as of late, where there's a logging of an incident. It doesn't have enough detail as to why there was no charging decision made or why the charge, if laid, was withdrawn. That type of level of detail is not available. But you can get these family violence printouts right now, which says there was an incident between these two people on X date. So what we kind of don't understand, or we don't have data to understand, is, well, what happened at that stage and why did it not progress any further?
Aside from the Harassment Act, there are also protection orders which a victim can get through the Family Violence Act.
He's well aware of the fact that he can't come round, and that if he does, I have every power in the world to get him locked up. But he can breach it if he wants to. There's nothing stopping him.
There's also the Harmful Digital Communications Act, which was established in 2015 to address some of the ways people use technology to hurt others.
What it does is it allows police to have powers to seek takedown orders or restraining orders, but it doesn't stop there, because I think Section 21 allows the police to then bring it back to the district court and charge them for any breaches of the orders. I mean, it's not a significant penalty. It's like, I think, a 6-month max penalty, but there are provisions at the moment.
So you don't think necessarily the fact that there isn't a stalking law is the issue? You think that there isn't enough awareness about the laws that are already in place?
I think it's twofold. First, there is not enough awareness of what the law is at the moment, because we do have the Harassment Act. And if people who felt that they were being stalked could have recourse through that act and compel the police to lay a criminal charge, that's not happening. In terms of the second issue, is that perhaps the way to get the police's interest is to lay a separate stalking charge under the Crimes Act, because that would effectively give them even more, impetus to actually act on it. The Harassment Act certainly involves a lot of judgment call by the police. Do I go down the criminal route, or do I say to them, go get a civil order? So I think that if you just say to the police, no longer do you have to make a judgment call, because here it is now definitely starkingly a crime, then the focus for them is easier. So I wonder whether the culture change comes when the police are told, well, it's now actually a crime under the Crimes Act. So you need to be more mindful of these things. It might involve training police officers to look out for these types of indicators, which are basically indicators of future harm. So they need to be told, don't just think it's some civil issue, it's actually now a criminal issue. That's the culture change.
Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith has committed to introducing a bill to make stalking illegal by the end of the year. What do you think will be in this legislation?
I'm hoping that the starting point for that legislation would be to look at some of the matters that have been raised in the Harassment Act and effectively clarify it or enhance it in some way. Because even the public outcry, which asked for things to be looked at and to make stalking a crime, the matters that they raise are very similar to what's in the Harassment Act. First of all, I guess the question is, do we need new legislation, or do we just need to introduce a crime into the Crimes Act? And I would imagine it's better to probably introduce a crime under the Crimes Act and then specify the circumstances in which that could happen. Having said that, I have no particular view against having a separate act to look at stalking separately either. Any new legislation needs to clearly identify what type of behavior would constitute stalking. It needs to cater for the very obvious visible types of stalking as well as the invisible types of stalking, which is usually electronic and it's cyber related. We need to settle on what we would like as a maximum penalty for this offending. Traditionally, in New Zealand, family violence type offences have started off with a 2-year maximum, and I don't think that it is out of line to start with that. It needs to provide some sort of protection and defences, and I think that needs to be looked at. We have reference to it in the Harassment Act, which was the reasonable person test. And we need to somehow provide, in my view, because I am a defense lawyer, some sort of protection against vexatious complaints. At the moment, we have under the Crimes Act an offence to make a false statement. That provides some safeguards against complainants who claim to have been assaulted and later withdraw that complaint for reasons where they've just lied. So we need a protection of some sorts of that nature as well. Although I guess the argument is, well, the false statement exists already in the Crimes Act, so that provides the protection.
But she says there should also be a consideration for different types of offenders.
It certainly needs to spell out also the type of options that police have. It might well be that a very low-level stalking, because the law will apply to all persons in New Zealand. We have very recognized research that suggests that young persons between the age of 18 to now even 22, 23 do not have the mental capacity to make rational decision making. So there has to be some recognition for that type of disability. So what I would suggest is probably some dialogue in terms of different levels of stalking. Do we want to say that the police have powers to deal with that slightly differently? Or do the courts have powers to deal with that slightly differently? Do we want to create a therapeutic court where the therapeutic court would look at these types of offences and consider what is the best course of action? Because remember, stalking laws are not just about punishing a defendant. Stalking laws should also find a way to empower victims of stalking so that they are feeling like they have a say and they have some control in what's happening to them. So a part of that could well be a therapeutic court that allows the complainant to decide what penalty, if anything, they want to have on this occasion.
Though all types of people can be victims of stalkers, receiving unwanted advances is particularly common for women. A World Health Organization survey from 2018 found almost 40% of women experienced sexual harassment in the last 5 years, compared to just over 20% of men. So how can you tell when unwanted contact crosses the criminal line? Iswari says young people put up with behaviour that older people wouldn't tolerate. So her advice on when to call the police about stalking varies.
It's hard to say when I could advise someone to do it because there's no one standard answer. So it will really depend on the circumstances. So if say, my 15-year-old niece was to come and say to me, this guy is constantly texting me and asking me to Snapchat him or Insta him or whatever, then that would be a different answer there to say a more mature woman who comes and says, I've now told this man to stop calling me, and 3 times he called me, because that could have a totally different impact for her than, say, my 15-year-old niece. So
how would it be different?
Different because my 15-year-old niece is more used to, say, 30 people asking her to Snapchat them. And she's just so conditioned to getting these requests that it has to be a little bit more pronounced before it starts bothering her, because they're just so used to living in this cyber type lifestyle where it's not unusual for a stranger to send you a message saying, can we snap or can we chat? Whereas a more matured woman is more circumspect as to who is allowed within her private space. So advice to those two people would be very different. It cannot be one size fits all. So I would probably be more insistent that the older person responds after the second call that's uninvited. Whereas I might probably wait for maybe the 5th or 6th chat from the younger person before I say it's actually gone far enough, you should consider going to the police.
But does the fact that the younger person is more conditioned to it, why does that mean that they should have to tolerate it more?
No, I don't think they're conditioned to cope with it. I think the impact on them is, I suppose in one way they are conditioned that way, because the impact of a request from a stranger is not the same as the impact on an older person, because older people are more circumspect about who has access to their private stuff, and younger people seem to be a little bit more free about their privacy breaches. I certainly cannot give a one-size-fits-all advice to someone. So it will really depend on the circumstances of what they're reporting. It is very circumstances related. It cannot be as soon as someone calls you the second time, go to the police. As defense lawyers, we're usually on the other side. I have dealt with some complainants in my career, but rarely do complainants come to us for assistance. we're usually persona non grata, but it is not unusual for us to see in serious crimes that we're defending, complainants habitually saying, it's happened to me before, I've told the police, I've raised this with so-and-so, nothing's happened, nothing was done. So my concern is that just the law alone, or changing or creating a new law alone, will not be sufficient. We're going to have to invest in changing the whole scene, so to speak. So everybody's minds need to be changed. Everybody's focus needs to be diverted to it so that there's some real change.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Iswari Jayanandan. This episode was engineered by Phil Benge and produced by Gwen McClure and Sharon Brett Kelly. I'm Davina Zimmer, ka kite anō.